Lower Mission has been the hottest neighborhood for condo buyers in Kelowna all year, but in July, it lost the top spot. And that's not the only part of the market that suddenly changed. Apartments moved into a buyer's market territory, townhomes tightened, and condos under $400,000 became the slowest properties to sell. And nearly 1 in 5 listings reset their days on market to 0 before finally selling. I went through all 165 condo and townhome sales from July, and I'm going to show you where the buyers are actually spending their money, how much of a price cut sellers are taking, and the craziest market stat that I've seen all year. I'm Mark with KelownaCondos.ca and Remax, and these market stat videos have become my favorite. One quick note before I get into the numbers, this data covers Kelowna and West Kelowna only. It doesn't include Lake Country or Big White. I've also excluded leasehold condos because they sell less frequency and they sell at different price points. Those would just distort the overall numbers. So let's start with the big picture. A total of 165 condos and townhomes sold in Kelowna and West Kelowna in July. Look back at July 2025, there were 162 sales. So this July, it finished about 2% ahead of last year. That may not sound like a lot, but it does matter when you compare it to what happened earlier this year. April sales were down 23% year over year. Then May and June bounced back sharply. Year to date, there have been 979 sales during the first 7 months of 2026. At the same point last year, there had been 956 sales. Again, this puts us slightly ahead of last year. So the market has recovered from the spring slowdown, but as of July, the apartment and townhome inventory is moving in different directions. There were 83 apartment sales in July, with a median sale price of $440,000. There were 77 townhome sales, with a median price of $695,000. Apartments, they sold on average for 94.6% of their asking price. Townhomes did slightly better at 95.5%, but these numbers are going to change dramatically later in the video. Looking at apartments, the 2-bedroom units again dominated the market. There were 57 2-bedroom apartment sales, representing 69% of all apartment transactions. 1-bedroom apartments accounted for 18 sales, or about 22%. There were 7 3-bedroom sales and 1 studio sale. That means more than 2 out of every 3 apartment buyers chose a 2-bedroom unit. Townhomes were similar to last month. 3-bedroom townhomes led with 36 sales, which represents 47% of the market. 2-bedroom townhomes accounted for 27 sales, or about 35% of the market. There were 13 4-bedroom sales and 1 5-bedroom sale. Now that's the same pattern that we've seen for several months now. For apartment buyers, they're concentrating on 2 bedrooms. For townhomes, the highest demand is in the 3 bedrooms. Now let's look at how much buyers are actually spending. Of the 83 apartment sales, 29 of them sold for under $400K. 38, they sold between $400,000 and $600,000. 11 sold between $600,000 and $800,000. 5 of them sold above $800,000. You put that together, and 81% of all apartment sales happened below $600K. That is where the apartment market is. As we'll see later, the lowest price range is not necessarily the strongest part of the market. In fact, it became the slowest. In the townhome market, only 4 sold below $400K. There were 12 sales between $400,000 and $600,000, and there were 34 sales between $600,000 and $800,000. Another 16 sold between $800,000 and $1 million. 11 of them sold for over $1 million. The clear sweet spot for townhomes remains in that $600,000 to $800,000 range. That price range accounted for 44% of all the townhome sales. If this kind of detailed breakdown helps you make sense of the market, subscribe to the channel. I publish an update like this every month, and this is the only place tracking Kelowna condo and townhome data at this level. Now, we get into the most important shift in July, the months of inventory. The overall months of inventory, it sits at 6. For reference, fewer than 3 months favors sellers. 3 to 6 months is considered balanced, and more than 6 months considered is a buyer's market. So when everything's blended together, the market is sitting directly on the line between a balanced and a buyer's market. But that number doesn't tell the real story. Apartments are now at 7.2 months of inventory. In June, there were 5.6 months. That's a pretty big jump for 1 month. Active apartment listings, they only increased 5%, from 567 to 597. But apartment sales, they were down from 101 in June to 83 in July. That is a decline of almost 18%. Maybe this decline is due to the fact that it's harder and harder for buyers to find the right condo. Now, townhomes, they moved in the opposite direction. Townhome inventory tightened from 5.3 months in June to 4.7 months in July. Active listings, they increased slightly from 381 to 387, but the sales increased, climbing from 72 to 82. So we can see that the apartments, they crossed into buyer's market territory, while the townhomes, they became way more competitive. Now, here is the months of inventory stat that I couldn't believe. Resale versus new construction. When you separate resale properties from new construction, meaning the buildings completed in 2025 or later, these numbers are shocking. Resale apartments are sitting at 6.4 months of inventory, not 7.2. Resale townhomes are sitting at 3.8 months, not 4.7. The overall resale inventory is approximately 5 months. That's a pretty balanced market, but new construction is a disaster. There are currently 167 active listings in buildings or townhomes constructed in 2025 or later. Only 5 of those units sold in July. Puts it at 35.2 months of inventory. That's almost 3 years. If we go back to June 1st, there have been 24 sales, which is still a whopping 14.7 months. These numbers, they also don't account for the builder's in-house sales and in-house listings. But I think if we factored those in, I'm sure that the sales would go up, but the months of inventory would also jump a lot more. From what I'm seeing, the main issue is price. New construction units that are selling, they tend to fall into one of 2 categories. They are priced very competitively, or they're located in luxury buildings where buyers are looking for premium finishes or a great view. Now, this is a good example of how misleading the market is right now. The news, it makes it sound like the buyers are winning and the sellers are desperate. But the buyers that I'm working with, they are really struggling to find condos that they like. The market, it feels like a buyer's market, but just with nothing to buy. So let's look at the days on market. As I've mentioned in my other videos, when a realtor cancels a listing and then relists it, the days on market number, it goes to 0. In July, 30 of the 165 properties that sold, they had been canceled and relisted. Now, that is close to 1 in every 5 sales. Once those previous listings are added back in, the true average days on market was 85. MLS reports an average of only 63 days. So let's break it down by price range. Under 400K, the MLS shows an average of 80 days. The true average, though, was 128 days. This was the slowest moving price range in July. Now, that's a change. For the last several months, the properties between 6 and 800K had taken the longest to sell. Between 4 and 600K, the MLS shows 61 days on market. The true average was 75 days. From 6 to 800K, MLS says 55 days. The true average was 74 days. 800,000 to $1 million, MLS showed 67 days, but the true average was 86 days. However, the median was only 51 days, which tells us that a handful of listings that sat for a long time, they pulled that average, or they pushed the average up higher. Now, over $1 million, MLS shows 46 days. The true average, 53 days. The biggest takeaway from this is a lower price doesn't automatically mean more buyers. If your property is below $400,000, you can expect to take up to 4 months to sell. So don't panic after 60 days. Now, days on market is not the only number that gets skewed by the published stats. As always, I compare the sale price with the seller's original asking price. But this time, I factored the canceled and relisted prices in, and this changed it a lot. In July, sellers received an average of 93.4% of their original asking price. If you only compare the sale price with the original price on the most recent listing, that number is 95%. And the MLS reported ratio, which compares the sale price with the final list price after all the reductions, was 97.1%. Those 3 numbers tell 3 completely different stories. The MLS suggests that sellers gave up less than 3 cents for every dollar they were asking. But when I used the very first listing price, sellers gave up almost 7 cents. Here's how that number breaks down by the final sale price. Below 400,000, sellers received approximately 90.3% of their true original asking price. 4 to 600K, it was approximately 93.1%. 6 to 800K, approximately 94.6%. From 800 to a million, it was approximately 95.3%. And above $1 million, it was approximately 94.3%. This is the same pattern that we've seen for months. I think it has more to do with negotiating than the actual list price. Most properties are negotiated between $20,000 and $40,000 off the list price. So the higher the price gets, the higher the percentage of the list price to sale gets. Below 400,000, sellers accepted almost 10% less than when they first started. This could be due to the fact that this is a market that has a lot of tenanted properties. It could also be priced under 400,000 for a reason. Maybe it doesn't show the best. Of the properties that sold in July, 55% were owner occupied. Another 36% were vacant, and only 6% were tenanted. But that number underestimates how difficult tenant properties are to sell right now. There are currently 138 tenanted units listed for sale, but only 10 tenanted units sold in July. That works out to nearly 14 months of inventory. Now, this is more than double the overall market and more than 3 times the level for owner-occupied property. Now, the reason is pretty straightforward. When there are several units listed in the same building, the tenanted property is often shown last. Showings are harder to schedule, the units often don't show as well, and the buyers often they don't want to wait more than 3 months to close. As a result, realtors often skip the tenanted option first, but they might return only after the buyer specifically wants that building. In the current market, buyers are gravitating towards the best presented and the easiest to purchase units. For a seller with a tenant in place, this is something worth considering before the property hits the market. So let's get into neighborhood sales, because July, it produced a new leader. Now again, these numbers, they cover Kelowna and West Kelowna only. West Kelowna recorded 27 sales. Glenmore, which includes Glenmore and North Glenmore, followed with 26 sales. Lower Mission last month had 24 sales. Kelowna North recorded 20 sales. Kelowna South had 19. Springfield and Spall had 18 sales. Rutland, which combines North Rutland and South Rutland, had 9. The University District had 8. So month after month, Lower Mission topped this list, but not in July. West Kelowna and Glenmore, they both had more sales. But I guess we'll see next month which neighborhood comes out on top. There are 4 major takeaways from July. First, sales volume has held steady. Second, the months of inventory, it can change dramatically month over month. Third, condos before 400,000 became the slowest properties to sell. And fourth, Lower Mission, it lost its position as the most active neighborhood. August 2025 saw 147 sales, and 90 of them were apartments. It'll be interesting to see what August 2026 does. Will the apartment sales bounce back? Who knows? Now, those are the numbers for July 2026 in the condo and townhome market in Kelowna and West Kelowna. If you'd like help finding the condo that's right for you and your situation, or you'd like to find out what your condo or townhome would sell for in today's market, you'll find my booking link and all my contact details in the description below. Let's talk. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.